Howdy ho, folks. Howdy ho. Howdy ho, America and points beyond. Who has power and what are they doing with it? Politics is not a natural act.
That's right.
That's right.
I must admit, I never heard that one from you, Jim.
There's so many feisty fighters against the greedheads and boneheads. So grab a libation, join the conversation. It's the personal side of politics, and it is surprisingly tasty. And howdy ho, indeed. Here we come with a special early bird edition of the Hightower Lowdown Happy Hour here at our Chat and Chew Cafe. So pop a cool one and join me in a libation today with my buddy, Professor Beto O'Rourke, in an erudite and scholarly analysis of the political skullduggery behind last week's Texas snowpocalypse, which is not a natural disaster at all, but a very unnatural disaster. And we're on a little bit early tonight because Beto has, in addition to his great grassroots work battling the bastards and bullshitters, he is now also teaching a course at the LBJ School at the University of Texas and also teaching at the Texas State University, where, by the way, Lyndon Johnson was a professor, went to school many moons ago. So we've got a slogan here in Texas, Beto. First of all, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on. It's great to be with you.
And of course, we've got the old Texas bumper sticker, don't mess with Texas. But of course, they are messing with Texas big time. And that's why I have this particular beer that I have chosen for me tonight, which is from the Thirsty Planet Brewery here in Austin. And it's called A Hot Mess Inside a Dumpster Fire Inside a Train Wreck. And that is how I would describe our state government's response to the snowpocalypse that has happened. And we find you in the Rio Grande Valley down in South Texas. I understand you're in Far, Texas. I have been far out in Far before. So we welcome you to be with us. And you're there because of your great grassroots organization powered by people. And what are y'all doing?
We brought water to the valley. There are parts of the RGV that are still under boil water notice. And for some families, they're able to boil water, but for others, it's a little bit harder. I was in a little unincorporated community, Jim, called Hargill, about 1,000 residents. They lost power for 4 days. In fact, I just finished talking to a wonderful gentleman, Mr. Davila. He's a Vietnam War veteran. He and his wife sat in their truck with the engine on in the evenings to keep warm because they just couldn't get warm in their home. He said he's eaten peanut butter and jelly for every meal for 5 days. They finally got power. They got their water, but they're on a boil water notice. So we picked up some water in Robstown in Nueces County and brought it down, gave it to them and other residents. But as you know, and you're absolutely right, in this unnatural disaster, not caused by God, but by man, and specifically the men in positions of public trust right now, there are big parts of the state that still do not have water. We are down south today. Yesterday, we were up in Rains County in a little town called Point, Texas, on 3rd Street, in fact. Those folks had not had water for the last 7 days straight. And they wonder, they ask, does anybody know that we exist in Point, Texas, in Rains County? And you'd love this, Jim. A city council member there heard that I was in town, came out to say hello and to say thanks for picking up the pallet of water in Waco. And she said, look, I'm a Republican, but I'll admit I haven't seen a Republican up here checking in on us to see how we're doing. Folks are very frustrated with their state government right now, as they should be.
Well, and, they're literally tilting at windmills here. Governor Abbott, Greg Abbott, and let's not forget Ted Cancun Cruz, who checked off all the boxes of Politics 101, how not to do it, when he fled Texas to go to Cancun with his family to escape the cold. And he said he just wanted to be a dad. He just wanted to help his daughters. Now, this is the same guy that has fought refugees suffering intolerable conditions in their countries in Central America, South America, Mexico, coming into our country, who didn't care that they were trying to get a better life for their children, and try to queue out a better life, and to do that on a reasonable basis. But here he is saying, well, I've got to go to the Ritz-Carlton resort in Cancun to get in touch with my inner, I don't know what it is, inner what, I don't know. But he even left his dog in the cold of his home in Houston, a dog named Snowflake, by the way. So you just can't make that up. Well, and here's a typical reaction from the people of Texas about Ted Cruz. This is Alistair Bannon, who's with our friend Laura Ehrlich, and there he is right there. That's how people feel about what Ted Cruz did in fleeing the state in the middle of a weather disaster. So, but let's go at what they're saying, because initially they said, well, it's because of the Green New Deal, this crisis, this weather crisis that we have. Got all these windmills out there, and they freeze up. And that caused this power outage. First of all, we don't have a Green New Deal yet. We haven't passed it. But secondly, was it really about windmills?
It's interesting. Wind and solar actually outperformed the forecast or what they were supposed to do over the course of the storm. So they did better than expected, just so everyone's clear on that point. And where you really had systemic failures were gas, coal, and even nuclear, both in the actual power generation and in the instruments there, because as we have since learned, following the rolling blackouts in 2011, after another heavy winter storm 10 years ago, there were all these promises made by those in elected positions of power. They were going to get this weatherized. They weren't going to let this happen again. And they actually, in fact, did nothing and allowed those power generation companies, the energy providers, and the folks responsible for the transmission lines to make obscene profits on the backs of those who were suffering in the midst of literally the worst weather crisis that we have faced as a state. You saw the bills, people are getting $10,000, $17,000, no connection to the rest of the national grid. So we couldn't pull power down in our moment of need, nor can we sell it back into the grid when we have times of abundance. And then we don't have any mechanism to incentivize or mandate extra capacity for when you have a disaster like this one. Most of the rest of the world, and certainly most of the rest of America, has a capacity market that encourages, incentivizes, and allows people to make profits on providing this power in crisis moments. We don't. And as you said at the top, and you're absolutely right, this didn't just happen to us. This was the result of decisions that were made, and decisions that disproportionately benefited and profited those companies and private providers, and disproportionately harmed people, and not just any old buddy, but those who are already dealing with really tough circumstances. I mentioned being in Point, Texas, on 3rd Street. Talking to some of those families, they were in some level of pain before this storm hit. And now they're having to deal with not having water for the last 7 or 8 days. I was in a small town called Rosebud yesterday that I know that you have visited. I walked in on the city council meeting of Rosebud with Mayor Zipperlin and the council members at the library there. They're trying to source water. Next over in Marlin, Texas, they're going to convenience store to convenience store. The mayor and city manager are trying to buy up extra bottles of water. In the 21st century, in the wealthiest country on the face of the planet, in the energy capital of North America, you like you said about Ted Cruz, you cannot make this stuff up, and yet it's happening, and it's happening to people. So you're absolutely right. This was not renewable energy. This was not Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez and the Green New Deal. This was Greg Abbott. This is Rick Perry. These are the people who, this is unbroken Republican leadership for the last 20 years.
Yes.
That has deregulated us into disaster.
Well, they have been, Republicans have been in charge of the Texas legislature and the state government, almost in a monopoly position for 20, 25 years now. And as I understand it, that Democrats have regularly, routinely, in every session of the legislature in that time period, offered legislation to do something, a big word that you used, mandate that these giant corporations that control our electric grid, that they have to at least weatherize it. But, they act as though, well, that would be prohibitively expensive. They managed to do it in North Dakota. I don't know if you've seen the movie Fargo, but it gets cold in North Dakota. It gets cold in Vermont, Minnesota, and other places that seem to be able to weatherize their grid. And we could do the same. But it's that money that is out there. Our governor, Greg Abbott, you mentioned oil and gas. Our governor has taken $26 million from oil and gas corporations since he has been in office. Isn't that a bit of a hindrance to progressive policies, or let's say humane policies?
Yeah, follow the money, right? And you begin to understand what is otherwise inexplicable. How could this happen? It's there are people who have an interest in this status quo that disproportionately hurts those who are already struggling. I keep talking about Rains County because in part, Jim, you've been so good about reminding us that Democrats or those who believe in progressive policies aren't just found in the big cities, although they're there, yes. But they're also in these small communities in these rural parts of Texas where Democrats used to fight for them. And this gentleman approached me at the county courthouse in Emory yesterday. He was in overalls. I'd say he's in his 70s. Kenny walks up to me and he said, I haven't had water this entire time. And I said, well, can I give you a case of water off the back of my truck? And he said, no, I'm drawing water from my pond. There's a pond on my property. And he said, a lot of people, of course, are concerned about COVID. I'm concerned about cholera. And, he shouldn't have to be worrying about this
exactly.
stuff. But the profits of these power companies and the campaign contributions that ensure the reelection of those who are already in power, that's what's driving these decisions, not Kenny's health and well-being and the quality of the water that he's drinking or others in those towns. So I think this is also, though, a great opportunity to show the distinction between what those Republicans in power statewide are doing or not doing, and then what Democrats are doing at the county commission level, the county right. judge level, mayor and aldermen and alderwomen. They're out there fighting for their constituents. I mentioned the mayor going from one convenience store to the next, buying as many bottles as she can, even if it's a 2-bottle limit, to get water for her constituents. They are doing so much right now, and I hope people remember that.
Well, it's people to people that really is working today. There's a photo we want to put up of a pickup truck near my home here in Austin that is exemplary of what folks are doing when the government is not standing up for them. They're trying to help each other out, and so here's a pickup truck loaded with water, saying, take some free water, bring your own jug, take some free water. So, and as you know, in your work with power, what is it again? I keep messing this up. Power for the people.
Powered by people. Yeah.
Powered by people, because that is what's happening. And that's the great strength of our country and of our state. I want to pick up on something you mentioned, and that's the rural areas and the farmers. But we've got some folks who want to visit with you and with all the other people who are tuned in. Again, not only through our Facebook page that you're watching this, but also Free Speech TV all across America, including in Far Texas, including in Point, Texas, including in small areas as well as big cities. Free Speech TV brings this kind of message to you that you're not going to get from Fox News, and frankly, not even from MSNBC, going out to where the people actually are and bringing those people on the air to talk about what we can do together to make this a better world and a better life for all of us. So let's hear from one or two of our listeners. Deanna, are you there with us?
I sure am. First of all, we've got so many people from all over the country, but actually all over Texas. Now that Texas is back online, we've got people in Cypress, in Houston, in Lubbock. We've got people in Bandera. Then all over the country, we've got Vermont, Massachusetts, the Appalachian region of Ohio, which is where my people are, and Minnesota, Nebraska, everywhere. Everybody wants to know what's happening and how they can help. Two questions that have come up from Caleb and from Debbie are both about ERCOT. Can we expect accountability? Caleb says, I just saw that 4 board members from ERCOT resigned and none of them even lived in Texas. So do we rework ERCOT? Do we scrap it and start over? What are y'all thinking about that?
Well, yes.
Jim, you want me to?
Yeah, just jump in there.
Well, so Caleb, Debbie, I think there obviously needs to be a complete review at ERCOT, but let's not allow the governor who appoints to the Public Utility Commission that oversees ERCOT. Let's not let the Railroad Commission, which oversees the energy production, especially oil and gas, and its transmission in the state of Texas, let's not let them off the hook. What they're going to want to do is point the finger at these ERCOT board members. Right. And what they'd like to say is, we got them to resign, job's over, we got some accountability, and let's move forward. Don't do that, or this will happen again, and I absolutely guarantee it, because what we know about climate change that is caused by our excesses and our emissions and our inaction in the face of science is that weather like this is going to become even more severe, deadlier, and it's going to destroy more in terms of people's lives and property and livelihoods. And so we've absolutely got to make these changes, as Jim said, weatherization, capacity, and introducing a capacity market. And then ERCOT has to connect to the national grid so that we can draw power down when we need it. If we had those reforms, you would not have an 11-year-old boy dying as he's trying to sleep in a trailer. You wouldn't have an 8-year-old girl dying of carbon monoxide poisoning next to her mother. You wouldn't have a Vietnam veteran dying as he goes to get that extra oxygen tank in his truck and his wife finds him dead later that night. You wouldn't have the 30 plus deaths just in the greater Houston area. And I read a great article or tweet thread by Zach Despart from the Houston Chronicle, because, and Jim knows this, we don't have medical examiners in every county. We're somewhat reliant upon justices of the peace to tell us whether someone died due to the blackouts and the lack of energy and water. And we may never get the final toll, but none of that had to happen. It was absolutely unnecessary. And I'll use Jim's word. It was an unnatural, man-made disaster. So yes, Caleb and Debbie, those are some changes that we could see, but we also have to ensure there's accountability and justice at the top where the buck stops, and that's with the governor.
At the very top. And the governor used a word that has been horribly overused by politicians who find themselves doing failure on their watch, or experiencing failure on their watch, and that is the term of that somehow or other we're not responsible. That what has happened is unacceptable. That's the word that I'm looking for. Unacceptable. Yet then they accept it. they like you say, point a few fingers at some agency somewhere, which is an administrative agency in the case of ERCOT, that administers, as you're pointing out, policies that are written by the Public Utility Commission, which is appointed by Governor Greg Abbott, including the chair and at least one other member who were former top staffers for Greg Abbott. Their policy is his policy, and his policy is then therefore ERCOT's policy. So that's where the buck stops, and that's what we've got to do. We've got to go after those people who have taken power from the people and abused their own power in the process for big money interests. I want to get back a little bit to something you mentioned, because as we've talked before, rural areas get overlooked by national and state media. They get shortchanged by by state and national government, farmers do. And yet they are suffering a huge loss right now, particularly small farmers. Boggy Creek Farm here in Austin, Texas, Green Gate Farm nearby, Hatton Hart Farm, another one that I've worked a lot with these small farmers and farmer markets and et cetera. And these are the most productive, the most innovative farmers that we have that are most ecologically sound, most connected to the community and concerned about the community. They're the best. And yet we not only shortchange them, we've, through our policies, state and national, try to displace them with industrial agribusiness giants. You hear about farm subsidies, you hear about crop subsidies, crop insurance. None of that goes to the small farmers. It all goes to very big farmers, and most of it goes to corporate entities, including Wall Street syndicates that own those farms. They're taking the billions of dollars. The people who do the least for us are getting the most, and the people who do the most are getting the least. And those folks are really squeezed, Beto, right now, because they're looking out. You know, I look out at my yard here and I see, oh, there's damage. You know, I'm going to have trouble with those plants coming back. And some of them aren't going to make it. But they're looking out at 50 acres of green, black glop that were vegetables. There were carrots and cauliflower and et cetera that were coming up. So they've lost the money that it cost them to put that crop in the ground. Now they've lost the sales that they would have gotten, the money they would have gotten by selling those crops. And now they got to somehow or other find money to put in a new crop in order to have an income this entire year. So we've got to remember that the farmers and it's an important thing that you're doing with going powered by people, going not just into the cities but also out into those rural counties and rural areas because we're all supposed to be in this together, and we're not going to be. And by the way, Democrats are not going to win those votes just by hoping that those people get mad at Republicans. We have to deliver, don't we? Deliver something tangible.
Absolutely. And there's so many opportunities for us to do that, beginning with just showing up. And part of what Powered by People is doing, we've got thousands of volunteers who made hundreds of thousands of phone calls to senior citizens in every affected county in Texas. And we could care less if you're Republican county, Democratic county, whatever. And for so many, Jim, and I made those phone calls along with my wife, people, when they realized you were calling and you weren't selling anything and you weren't asking for anything and you were just calling to check in and see if the person's okay, if they need to get to a warming center, if they need water delivered to their home. So many broke down and started crying because they'd been isolated in their cold homes under 3 or 4 blankets, trying to stay warm, wondering, like the woman in Point said, wondering if anyone knew that they existed. So we've got to go to those places, and we're now doing that in person. So today we knocked doors in Hidalgo County, and we knocked doors in Montgomery County, yesterday in Rains and Travis and Bear and Harris County. But on this issue of farmers, as we were driving in to Cameron County this morning, we passed farm workers working an onion field. And as you know, those onions are very hardy. They survived what just hit Texas. But we pulled over and we walked out into the field and we started talking to and listening to some of these field workers. And this brother-sister team couldn't have been older than 20, who were talking to us as they were working with their shears and cutting the onion and taking it over to the box and then sharpening their shears, and just in the beautiful fluid motion as they were doing it. I said, tell me what your day's like. And they said, well, we leave Edinburgh at, 5:30 or 6. We get here at 6:30 a.m. We wait until it opens up at 8 because they're getting in line to go work those onions, and they're obviously paid by how many boxes they fill. And they work until there's no more onions to be worked. And they go home and they come back and they do it again. And in addition to the people who own the farms, the people who work on these farms and in these fields, they're dependent on this for their livelihood. And this is obviously what all of us depend on to eat. And so you're absolutely right. We cannot lose focus and we cannot lose touch. And it's got to be on the mom and pop farms, but it's got to be on the folks who are working in those farms and on those fields as well. Even if it's the folks working on those big corporate farms, they're still people, and they're really at the it's this perverse irony. They're producing our food, and they're at the end of the food chain, and we got to stand up for them. So yeah, absolutely. Wherever you are in Texas, we got to be there, and we got to be there for you. And if ever there were a time to demonstrate that, I think it's now, when people are really wondering why we have people in charge of our government who don't believe in government and don't believe in governing. And in Ted Cruz's case, would like to overthrow the government we have.
Well, there's even a movement in the Texas legislature for Texas to secede from the union. There's actually a state representative from out in the Fredericksburg area who has put in a bill calling for a vote of the people to be able to secede from the union. Well, we see what secession has brought us with our energy grid. And by the way, you're from El Paso. El Paso didn't have the kind of torture that people elsewhere in the state have experienced. Why is that?
So El Paso and much of the Panhandle are not part of ERCOT, and we're on the Western Interconnect. So when we need power, we can draw it down. And when we generate power, and I'd love to see El Paso generate more through solar and wind, but when we do that beyond the needs of our community, we can also sell that onto the grid. So I got to tell you, Jim, I feel like El Paso made the case to the rest of the Texas about the wisdom of being interdependent. You know, we talk a lot about independence in Texas, and I think that's a worthy virtue. But interdependence, as I've seen, as I watch, as you said, the neighbor who drives up with his pickup truck with 40 gallons of water and says, please take water when you need it. That's the virtue of interdependence. We're all connected, and we all do better when we're all doing better. Yep. And I'd love to see that value cherished a little bit more in Texas. And I'd like to see those in public office who believe that when we are connected and there for one another, we all do better. And as we saw in Texas, when we cut ourselves off from the rest of the country, we lose out on opportunity, and we also lose lives unnecessarily in storms like this one.
This is a dramatic failure of you can't even call it leadership. It's an abdication of leadership. It is a selling out of our people's power, the public power, to private greed. And that is what happened here. And that's the importance of what you're doing with Powered by People, going to the people themselves and rallying them to a politics that's not about just rank partisanship, but is about policies, about policies that, as you're saying, work for everybody. That's the notion that's supposed to hold us together as a society. And I find, tell me what you think, but I find that people want that, and people who might call themselves Republicans or might call themselves Trumpistas might share some views that are not along with you and me, but they fundamentally care about fairness and justice and opportunity for all.
Absolutely. Up there in Rains County yesterday, one of the folks who met us to help distribute the water is wearing a Make America Great Again mask, but says, hey, I'm so happy that you're up here, and let's figure out how we can work together and get some help to people. And, it's funny because my wife has heard me railing against, some of these folks who I really do think are complicit in the sedition and the insurrection and the coup attempt, and Ted Cruz, of course. And
Ted Cruz.
And it's really, if I'm honest with you, Jim, it's made it hard for me to make peace with the Republican Party, given the fact that it seems so captured by Trump and Trumpism and this trafficking in lies and sedition. So my wife asked me, she said, well, after you distributed water with this guy in the Trump mask, how did you feel about him? I said, well, it was actually hard to judge the guy and hard to hold a grudge, because I saw that guy, busting his tail for his community, and he deeply cared about making sure everyone was okay. And he was super kind and warm and welcoming to me. And kind of back to something you said, it's that people to people connection. And I think we need, or I know that we need more of that. And I think it's incumbent upon Democrats, if we want to be winning elections, to show up for people wherever they are and whoever they are in whatever part of the state, and just demonstrate that we're gonna be there. We believe that government can solve some of these problems that none of us are able to solve on our own, and we're going to disagree about some things, and that's perfectly fine. But at the end of the day, we want to move this state forward. That's something that comes through to me as I travel the state right now. I mean, I've never asked anybody that we've dropped water off to, or anyone whose door I've knocked on, what political party they are. Right. They just want government to work, and they're justifiably angry that it failed them at this moment of need, which has become a moment of truth for Texas.
Well, it's important. A fundamental importance that you have brought in your last few years in the political sphere is that you listen to people. And then talking with organizations like the Georgia Voter Project that Stacey Abrams led, or People's Action that's operating in about 35 states around, is when they go door to door in these conservative areas, the most common reaction they get is, nobody's ever listened to me before. And just, as you say, be there, but listen, actually hear their stories and what they want to have happen for them and their children. One more thing, I know now that you've got to put your professor hat on and put your Harvard robes and mortarboard and everything on to go be a professor. But what about the young folks that you are teaching, that you are reaching out to? What are you finding? What's their attitude?
This is a constant in my life. Being with young people always leaves me fired up, inspired, hopeful, almost confident that we are going to be okay. That they are so focused on the future, so unwilling to truck any bullshit or excuses, or, well, let me justify this thing because of that. No, we should be able to do this, and I want to find a way to do this, whatever this is. That could be electrifying the grid and getting to some version of the Green New Deal. It could be making sure that everybody has access to healthcare. It could be the issue that I care about perhaps more than any other, voting rights and civil rights, and making sure that everyone who wants to participate in our democracy is able to do so. And furthermore, that no one based on the color of their skin or their country of national origin is effectively and functionally prevented from voting, from running for office, and from having their voice heard, which, as we know, happens in Texas and has produced a state that is 46th in voter turnout, not for any lack of love of democracy, but because we are drawn that way, and we are kept back from those who would work in voter suppression and voter intimidation. These young people are just not going to take it. They're not going to stand for it. They're not going to accept that it has to be that way because it's always been that way. And I leave a class with them, and perhaps some of the cynicism that has crept in over the years, or some of the complacency that can set in, all of that just magically evaporates. And I'm fired up, and I want to get to work, and I want to make sure that we are worthy of these young people who believe that we are capable, we as a state, we as a country, we as a people, of doing great things. I want us to do that. And so I knew this going into these two teaching opportunities, that I would learn just as much or more than what I could share or teach. And that has borne out over the last 2 months. And as you know, both in San Marcos and in Austin, we haven't been able to meet and hold classes even virtually, because students haven't had water and they haven't had electricity, and they've been trying to take care of their parents and grandparents and themselves and their kids. And so I'm really looking forward to getting to connect with them again this week and see how they're doing. But it's really a huge honor and a real thrill to be able to do this work.
Well, thank you for doing the work, and thank you for joining us. And we want to stay connected to you as you move along, because it's people like you that we want to highlight, and that's why the Hightower Lowdown, by the way, which has a free weekly email. Did you hear me say free? Yes, free, no money. Trade changes hands. You can get it for free weekly email. And that is the hightowerlowdown.org/email. You just go there and you can sign up and get it every week. And each email is filled with exactly what we've been talking about today, and that is people taking charge and making a difference in their own community and through their own community, making a big difference in what our nation is going to be. And we count on good folks like you, Beto O'Rourke, for standing up and helping to organize that. It's one thing to say, well, I'm for it, but another thing to stick your neck out and go out there and do the work that it does take to maintain a little d democracy in our country. So that's what we're all about. We're going to stay connected with you and with your wonderful group, Powered by People. So please keep us posted on what you're doing, and we will be back with all of these good listeners and activists and agitators today. We will be back in a couple of weeks with another one of these presentations of the Hightower Lowdown Chat and Chew Happy Hour. Thanks so much for joining us.